Hi, welcome to this week's interview. And today I got Cate Peterson with me. And as I was just chatting with Cate a minute ago, that it's impossible to do a short introduction. But I will try because Cate has been doing so much amazing work in the last 3 decades. And also your work is evolving so much. So I will try my best to do a very short rundown, but then we're going to talk through what you're doing and the message and the things that you're advocating and really care about. Sound good?
That sounds great. I think it's just that I'm so old. That's why I've done so much.
No, like not at all. Like I'm sure people could have spent 3 decades not having all this experience and evolved to the way that you have led your work, because none of that seems easy. Anyway, let's all hold the horses. Let me start with a very short outline that what I gather. So first of all, you were trained as a Japanese yoga teacher since 1994. Then you've been teaching workshops and conferences in various yoga teaching disciplines. And so for more than 3 decades, you've been, say, yoga teacher, meditator, mentor, and may I add activist, because I think you really champion a lot of things. So, so I would say you're such an activist in what you do. And primarily I see you using yoga as a tool to help people. And the way I look at it, it's very much is using yoga as a tool or engine to connect people first to their body, perhaps more individually, to be more mindful and care about the well-being, but also collectively as a way to unite people to look after themselves and our environment, which I see like a living body around us, surrounding us. And that's that piece of well-being. And also looking after like health and well-being in a more holistic way, not just our individuals, but more collectively, and also in the environment. So that's how I see how your work sort of evolve, connecting individuals to the community, to the environment. So that's why it's simply quite complex for me to even just do a simple introduction and say you are a teacher or a mentor. But what I also find fascinating, which we're going to dig a little bit deeper, is that I know you first started providing classes to organizations and individuals, and then you developed what a lot of people know as Yoga Pass, which is very successful in spreading yoga, and then eventually evolved to Yoga Hive. But I find what's so fascinating is that, a lot of people may take the path of teaching yoga, many like teaching students in a very meaningful way, but you seem to have a very different strategic or a bridge role to take yoga to maybe more organizational level or like corporate scene, to make yoga a lot more, I don't know, in the mainstream, if that's the right way to say, but really spread across in Australia. So that was really amazing. And that's like not really introduction, but like a little bit about Cate. So welcome, first of all. Hi.
Thank you so much. I love talking with you always, and it's really nice to be invited onto your podcast.
So, okay, so going back to what I was saying, so tell us a little bit more about, I would say, your journey. So clearly after you became a teacher, you were teaching in many different, way to spread yoga. But how does it, like, tell us then the journey to maybe the Yoga Pass, the idea behind it, and then eventually Yoga Hive, and what Yoga Hive is really doing right now.
Yes, thanks for asking seriously, thank you for bringing it together in such a cohesive manner. I'm not very good at that, but I can describe to you how it's evolved and why it's evolved. And I think that, personal stories are very, very important. And mine is a very personal story. So I started to practice yoga when I was 19, but I didn't start to teach yoga until I was about 30. And as with for many people, yoga, when the going gets tough, they kind of think, what can I do to bring my mind and body and soul back together again? And they turn to yoga, and yoga gives them a whole lot of ways to do that and techniques to follow. So that was certainly true for me. But during that period when I wasn't a yoga teacher, before I became a yoga teacher, I was very much an activist. And at one point I was along with my cousin, the secretary for something called the Local Exchange and Trading Systems. So that was a non-cash currency system that developed across Australia. It had 400 chapters all in local areas, and it allowed people to barter. And it was a fantastic idea because, money is in short supply in some communities. And so having the capacity to actually come together and purchase things for a non-cash currency was really, really useful for people. So we pushed that agenda very, very strongly. It was going so strongly that Social Security was about to give the pamphlet to everybody that joined Social Security at that point, because they felt that Let's really addressed a whole lot of indices of poverty other than money, which was access to services, access to friendships, community support, access to knowledge, etc., that just were not being addressed for people who were getting the money from Social Security, but none of the other things to overcome poverty. So I'm saying this because it was a very involved process with a lot of people, etc., and what kept coming up for me was, if only people in these meetings were more evolved. I mean, we all know that, right? Anybody who goes to a meeting, I think, isn't the statistic 69% of meetings are a waste of time? Because you go there, there's an idea that people want to get across the line, but everybody's stuff comes up, The way that you participate in a meeting is probably the way that you're bringing up the children, is probably the way you boil the egg. People have a flavour or a set of difficulties, I guess, in relating to other people and in relating to bigger ideas that block them from doing that. And so I really am telling you this because this is why I went to yoga. And I love what I'm doing with Let's. I love what I'm doing in social activism, but it keeps stumbling over one basic block, which is the personalities involved. So until we as people start to evolve a little more clearly so that we don't have to deal with our anger management issues, our lack of self-confidence, the fact that we're always sick so we never get to that meeting, the fact that we're indecisive, whatever it may be, it makes working as a community, as a movement, more ineffective if the people within that movement or community are ineffective for some reason or held back in some way. So that's why I went back to yoga. I kind of went, we have to start at basic building blocks. We have to start working on each individual so that people feel stronger and have more of themselves to participate with, more of themselves to give with. So I came to yoga from quite a political perspective.
That's one of the most interesting things I've heard about getting into yoga. And, I think it's amazing what you just said, because your story tells me that you see beyond what is in front of you. Say these meetings or this conflict or these sort of issues that won't happen or can get resolved quicker if people are just more themselves, because they're not themselves. They are bound by fear or anger or whatever that is. So they're not in their normal natural state. And I do find yoga really help us to bring us back to the normal state of being, which is in peace and happy. And so that really you really went to the cause of a lot of these things, not just the obvious cause, that who did what to whom, but what is behind it. So it is really amazing. And then, so, which led to my second question. So once you started, getting, from maybe political angle to get involved in learning and teaching yoga, then the next step, it seems to me that you were really strategic, or somehow you become, managed to scale this yoga into like more mainstream with more people. So what triggers that at which point you think teaching in this capacity is great, but that's not what I'm after? So what happened then?
Well, I mean, I think that's an ongoing process of refinement. But at the very beginning, I was teaching in the North Shore of Sydney. So obviously, I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are working in corporate jobs, I guess. I come from a corporate family, and I've seen the damage that can do, to be frank. I feel like, especially back then, which was 20-something years ago, there was a lot of practices in workplaces which were completely disempowering to the people in those workplaces, completely stressful. Bullying wasn't even on the table as a thought, but neither was a whole lot of other stuff on the table. So I was watching the fallout from workplaces coming into my classes, and I was running, I don't know, I think in my heyday I was running like 35 classes a week. So, a lot of classes. And really feeling like, we have to kind of go out there and I think it's the wrong word, guerrilla warfare, but you know what I mean? We have to infiltrate, change the way that this operates. And the way that I see that happening is by establishing a yogic principles within businesses. So we started at a very basic level of trying to get yoga classes into businesses. Like these days, totally normal, most many businesses have yoga as a thing. But they didn't in those days. So it took me 2 years to get in there and try and convince our business to take us on. We, along with another group called Karma Yoga, run by a lovely man called Paul, were the first 2 groups that started workplace yoga in Australia. So we started, and when we were at our zenith, we had 52 corporations that we were dealing with every week. So we were making an impact. But now here comes the big but. The weird thing was that no matter whether we were with the Reserve Bank of Australia, IAG, whatever it was going to be, Merck, etc., the big organisations, right? It would keep coming down to 8 people in that class. So I don't understand why, but it just kept doing it. So eventually we did a bit of a questionnaire and we said, hey, why are you coming to yoga? And we got all the responses back and we collated them. And, we got flat abs to stop my headaches, to help me sleep. These are really important things, really, really important things. But I also felt that, we're not getting the point across, we're not really communicating what yoga is about. Yoga is about all those things, and that's the fundamental part. Like if you're not sleeping, there's not going to be much of you to go around during the day. If you've got a headache, same thing. If your back hurts, of course, these things have to be addressed, but they're base level. And then once people feel better in their body and their mind and their soul, then they can start to come together in communities and spread the love. So at that point, I just went, this is not actually doing what I want it to do. And so we went back to the drawing board and we took the word yoga out of our yoga offering. We were called Yoga Solutions. Instead, we called it Healthier Results. That's a good corporate name, as you can hear, and appeals to corporations. And we went back to the same companies and we said, hey, we're not going to be running weekly classes anymore. Or we gave it to one of the teachers or did whatever, but we are going to run these lunchtime sessions. And we're not going to charge you $10 for somebody to come to the yoga class. We're going to charge you $660, which was quite a lot in those days. And it's a PowerPoint presentation. Corporations love PowerPoints. And we broke yoga down into component parts. So we did things like the Anahata yoga was change of heart, we called it. And then we did delicious nutritious, which was talking about the niyama of eating. And then we talked about the breath of life, which is the pranayama. And we talked about desktop yoga, which is the movement that you do at a desk to try and keep your mind and body and presenteeism at bay. So we broke it down and it was highly successful. It was really, really great. So that was kind of hitting the target in a much more thorough way. And it was also bringing into the room the people that were out there that weren't brave enough to come to yoga,
Right.
We purple door syndrome. People get like, yoga.
I'm too stiff. I'm not flexible.
Yes, that one. I'm not 22 anymore. I'm not a woman.
Well, this is so interesting because once again, I don't know, like maybe when you're saying it, you don't hear it, but from me, or I'm sure audience can hear, once again, you go beyond what you do. I mean, it was already highly successful for many people's standard that you may be in touch with 52 organizations running many, many classes. It's already like something that people would love to achieve, but yet you see beyond and say, yeah, that's great, but it's not ultimately what you want to bring across. It's the deeper philosophy, the deeper way of living that you really care about, which you can see that's where it really stems out to help people. So you challenge yourself again, you rebrand and do this completely differently, and then you manage to get the message across. So that's fantastic. And I didn't mention it, but you also ran the World Day of Yoga in 2015 in Bondi, and 2016 in both Bondi and Sydney Opera House. And these are huge events. And, yoga really becomes something that people talk about. And remember, it was huge. Like from those photos, there's like lots of people.
Yeah. There were lots of people, which was very, very gratifying.
And so, so it sounds like, so at that point, it sounds great. Like you did what you want to do. Like you had many organizations came on board and hear your message. And then what got evolved after? Like what happened next?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I have a low frustration tolerance, right?
No, I think you always aim for more. You're aiming like every step you're saying, it's like something deeper, something higher, something even bigger scale.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And I healthy results kind of dwindled because I was single mothering, and I had two daughters doing their HSC one after the other. So it was healthy results involved a lot of travel. We were doing a lot of corporate conferences overseas and all that kind of stuff. So I just ran out of puff, to be frank, and took a break, went back to just your basic teaching and trying to feel my way through. And I was running a yoga center in Kirribilli as well, a busy studio. We lost that studio, which was the genesis for the next thing that happened. So there was HSC going on, single motherhood, losing the studio because the woman next door was a litigation lawyer. Long story, I won't bore you with that one, but basically we lost the studio, which was after several years of having run it. It was a really big blow. And so as a consequence of losing that studio, people started to ring me and say, now that you're not there, where can we go? And it was like, this would happen 10 times a day, because we were running 35. And on top of everything, I can tell you, it was just like, oh, well, I know you're this kind of person, maybe this sort of. Finally, I thought, I'm going to have to do like a marriage service here, between the yoga studio and the people. And then in the shower one day, the idea of yoga pass came to me. I thought, that's not a bad idea. We can find studios for people. They need to go and try Satyananda, Bikram, Hatha, Japanese yoga, whatever it's going to be, and then work out where their path is. Because too many times, and I'm sure you've heard it many times before, where people say, I went to yoga and I didn't like it. End of story. It's like, what yoga did you do? How is that possible? So,
but there are many kinds, as you just said. Like when I was younger, I only want Ashtanga. Like I need to sweat, I need to work out, I need to like feel strong. But as I grow older, it's like, you know what? You can chill out a little bit. You can enjoy the mindfulness. The hatha, it's great in the morning. You don't have to be like dripping, So people want different things at different stage in their life, and which really also really resonate what you said before. Life is changing, is inevitable, and some of the losses may bring new opportunity. And in my book, I talk a lot about transition, and you were a classic example that that's not like slightly like maybe like age may put an impact because you want to be like traveling all the time, but also the circumstance of your children and but everything put together that you got to make a choice. And so that's what happened. Then you got the yoga pass, which I remember it was like huge. Like, everywhere you go, I hear yoga pass.
Yeah, we did really, really well for quite a number of years. And I did that with my friend, Alex Grant from Find Yoga. So we worked together because he already had a fantastic database of yoga teachers. But his is a commercial model, and with Yoga Pass, the intention was to spread yoga, So we really wanted every single yoga teacher in their bedroom, in their, backyard, in their garage to be on there. So we needed to make it free. So we started down that path with Yoga Pass, and it was purely at that point, a yoga studio could join. They could join, and they could be. They could accept 10 yoga passes, 2, 1, etc., depending on their economic model, etc., etc. But anyway, we got it to happen, and we learned a lot of lessons on the way. And then and now I'll tell you what happened next. So I suddenly became aware of this thing called Off the Mat Into the World, which some of your viewers will know of. It's run by Sean Corn and Halakuri and Suzanne Gray over in the States. And it is what it says, taking your yoga practice off the mat and applying it into the world and doing things that are useful in a bigger sense. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine it was just like, yes, somebody's doing this. I don't have to create it. So I'd like to be part of that. So we took that model and we loved what they did. We took their curriculum, which was a training for yoga teachers to do this work. And we looked at it and went, this is so American, we need to sit. And so we sat for a year and we altered it and tweaked it and got it to be something that was more relevant to Australia. And we went at that for about 6 years, did teacher trainings and lots of charitable events, et cetera, talking about the bigger picture that yoga can be responsible for and useful in. And about 2 years before, no, maybe the last year that we were there doing that, or 2 years, 2015, then Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, stepped up in his inaugural speech to the UN Council, and I can't remember the exact words. I wish I'd remembered to bring them here and read them to you. But it was basically, yoga by creating healthy, happy, strong, focused people and allowing people to keep one pointed focus and work towards specific ends and to roll with the punches and understand their place in nature. For all these reasons, yoga prepares us to deal with climate change. In the UN, really. So wow. He had the most incredible response. So he said, I therefore invite all member states, there's 193, I think, countries in the UN, to join with me and in celebrating a International Yoga Day once a year. And for some reason, there was no other International Yoga Day on the solstice, which was June the 21st, which was all very well in other parts of the world where it's warm, but here it's freezing. Anyway, so it became the International Yoga Day, and it's to great effect. So 174 of the 193 countries endorsed and supported that move, which was unheard of. It was a really, really big uptake. So it was really coming back to that very beginning thought that I'd had millions of years ago in my life, which was that yoga can have a much bigger impact than just what we do with our individual students.
Yeah, I can hear it because it all goes back to what we said at the beginning. It can be a tool and an engine because the philosophy and the practice involved, but essentially it's really helping you to become who you're meant to be, like get in touch with your state of being as well as with others and environments. So wow, so that's another huge campaign and things you did. So then what happened after? Because what about Love Earth? That's it. Is it another chapter of all this campaign?
That's pottering along in the background there, and it's a beautiful thing. Love Earth has been ticking along for about 8 years, and that was born out of guilt. So what happened was we had 52 corporations, as as I've said, and each of those corporations had their own logo and their own look and feel. And we were dealing with a company in Taiwan that provided our mats. So if somebody had a pink logo, then we'd come up with a pink mat. And if they had a brown logo, we'd bring a brown mat, whatever it was. And we'd specifically put yoga solutions on it, but it would be different colors and et cetera, et cetera. And then one day I woke up to discover what I hadn't kind of clocked onto before, which was that the mats we were using were made out of PVC, which was toxic as anything. So it's actually carcinogenic and isn't used in kids' toys in Europe and America. And we were getting our sweaty noses and our bodies down onto the mats, which was really dangerous. And for the environment, I spent my entire childhood collecting plastic and horrible bits off beaches. It was just like, what am I doing? This is plastic. It doesn't rot, it's really poisonous. It's petrochemical. It's not yoga. And so we then talked to the company that we worked with in Taiwan, and we mobilized that relationship so that we could design a mat that's made out of tree rubber and jute and is entirely compostable. So it's got no nasties in it. So we did that, and we now have just two. We've got the pure one with no colors, no nothing, and the other one that's got binchatan charcoal, which is also a beautiful color and really really pure, really pure. So but at the same time, what it was set up to do was to recall and retrieve all the yoga mats from around the country that were being used that were plastic, to stop them ending up in landfill. So I think it's close to 5,000, just under 5,000 yoga mats that we've taken. We've repurposed out there. So they go to homeless shelters. If they're really awful, they go to animal shelters. Otherwise, they go to prisons. They go to people that are running karma yoga projects for disadvantaged groups around the country. There's a lot that go to something called Fair Game, out to remote communities in the Western Australian area, and a whole lot of other places too. So yeah, I'm really proud and happy with what we've done there. It's been beautiful.
Wow. So like, I think after listening to all these projects and initiatives you've done, people really understand different aspects of yoga. It's definitely way more than just doing some stretches on a mat. There's so many aspects that you have touched. But you know what got me curious is that what do you think, from your experience, you've been around the yoga scene in Australia for over 30 years. What has changed? Is it just yoga become much more household, like sort of name, or more mainstream? What else have changed in your opinion about yoga, or perception of yoga and the practices of yoga?
It's completely changed, when you think about it. IYTA, International Yoga Teachers Association, had their first teacher training in Australia, the first ever teacher training in Australia, only 50 years ago. So it's not that long, is it, really? No. But now we've just created the database. We are creating, should I say, we're getting there, almost finished. Not that we'll ever finish, but the database of yoga teachers in Australia, which is well over 30,000 yoga teachers. So it's a force for change. And it didn't used to be. Back when I started, it was something that if you said the word yoga, people just went, hippie, tick, That was what they thought. So the great wonder of what's happened is that it's become so mainstream. And unfortunately, I suspect that's because of need. People are so... Okay, maybe I guess let's look at it more positively. The thing is that in Australia, a lot of people have come from overseas, were born overseas, have come here. Those that were born here, those that were indigenously Australian initially, for many reasons, people come here, and this place there's a lot of trauma, is what I'm trying to say, which we see in the statistics around obesity and around social isolation and around heart attacks and around cancer. And, there's a lot of trauma in this country, which we need to address. So I think that the 30,000 yoga teachers growing, like there's over 100 teacher training institutions now in Australia, are rising to address that need. And it's got to start somewhere. So there's a lot of small courses now of 200 hours, whereas, it used to be a 3-year thing that you did to become a yoga teacher. And whilst there's a lot of frustration amongst older yogis or more experienced yogis about the level of yoga that's being taught out there, I feel like, if you look at a forest, lots of little saplings grow, and the older trees take responsibility and create light to come into those little saplings, etc., and eventually everything flourishes. But we as a community hopefully will find our way through and assist all those yoga teachers to remain in the business and to remain in the doing of yoga, because every yoga teacher translates to however many people they are out there working with. So let's say 100. So if you even said, okay, each yoga teacher teaches 100 people in their classes a week, which is probably not true, it's probably more, but that's a lot of people, isn't it? A lot of people. So that's 300. Is that true? I can't. I'm my math.
I mean, it's a really exponentially, a yoga teacher, if you carry the principle and teaching and the practices, they can touch many lives, and it's also ongoing, right? So, which I that's why I love your analogy about the forest with big old tall trees and maybe small bushes. And
Yeah.
that's why I know that you unofficially mentor many people like teachers. And I think it is so important because a lot of people, they're passionate about, say, whatever aspect they picked about yoga, and then they are very, excited, and then they want to become a teacher. But then what's next? It's an entirely new chapter, right? And then a lot of times people actually need the nurturing, the support and mentoring so that they can become a bigger tree eventually. And I definitely see, especially there's such a demand, there's such a need, and there's such an interest. But that's not like that's all it is. That it actually there's a lot more to go for it, so that you can have a great forest. So that mentoring piece, I think, is super important. It's just like with coaches. We have coaches is like, getting certified every day, but then the journey actually begins, or a true yogi journey begins after, right?
That's it, exactly that. Yeah, it's so true. So the door has to be opened, and you're always going to find people who know less than you. So there's always someone to teach, but you have to keep progressing. So I think the mentoring aspect of what we're able to give, to provide and to seek within our yoga community is fundamental, really, really fundamental. So I like that. And I think, that the frustrations that the more experienced yogis are feeling, like, oh, there's yoga in every gym, it's really competitive, that's what we're trying to address with Yoga Hive and Get Off Your Asana. So if I might just let you know what that is, then you'll see how that journey's taken off as well. So Off Your Mat into the World, Get Off Your Mat into the World was fantastic for 6 years, but we set up Yoga Hive to support Off the Mat and Into the World. And we did that because it's really, there's, it's not like advertising or any other corporation. There's not much money in yoga, there's a lot of joy, but Michelle Ferreira, who's written the Yogi Project lately, interviewed 185 studios and found that 62% of studio owners are not taking home a living wage. They're below the poverty line. Like, wow, it's actually an act of devotion for most people to run a yoga studio and to have a yogic lifestyle. It's not something that is particularly remunerating. There's exceptions, but, in general, it's not so remunerating. And that has to change because we keep getting people into the profession and then they just can't survive, so they leave and they take all that knowledge, and of course they're applying it to whatever they then do, but they're not giving it in such a concentrated form.
That's so interesting, like what you just said, because for example, in the self-publishing industry, like a lot of authors, there's some statistic report out of UK, and that it looks like a lot of authors are also below the poverty line. But then you also know people who are very successful with self-publishing, and they may be creating a lot of books a year, or maybe they're very good with the marketing, whatever reason. There are some people doing very well, which is exactly like what you said. But in the publishing industry, for instance, there's lots of change because of technology, because of the changing of our society. But then, like also in the profession of yoga, what do you see that could be helpful to think about, so that it may change this scenario where it sounds sad that people have such a idealistic way of approaching this as a profession, because they want to quit their day job, they want to teach yoga because they love it, but then the reality is it's not so easy to make a living. So what would you advise for people who are thinking about this?
I think what we're doing is addressing that, and we're addressing that in a different way, which is not like, there's a lot of calls to really legislate yoga, and only those people that have done over a certain number of hours, etc., should teach, etc., so all of the others go away. So where does that leave everybody? It's not great. So we are trying to increase the span of what yoga does in this country. So if you have a look at our website, yogahive.com.au, you'll see there's a section there which is called Yoga as Therapy. And it's yogis within this country who've written really interesting articles about scoliosis, about social isolation, and about breast cancer, etc., and how yoga is appropriate to those things. So we're going to be doing promotional campaigns on each of those areas for 1 month. And that means approaching government organisations, approaching all the health professionals working in that area, the people who are suffering themselves, the charities, the support groups, etc., giving away free Yoga Hive passes, getting people to actually understand why yoga would be an appropriate mechanism for dealing with that. So at the moment, we're doing this big thing with McDonald's, which we did last year as well, McDonald's Monopoly, and we've given them, or sold them rather, we haven't given. Last year we sold 12,000 Yoga Hive passes to them. So 12,000 people who went in, mostly people who supersized in McDonald's, were getting a Yoga Hive pass. And they're not your traditional yogis, right? People that supersize at McDonald's. So we're getting calls from all around the countryside about, my granddaughter gave me this, or I've got sore knees, or what do you wear to yoga, and do I have to, et cetera, very beginner level, but drawing people in to do yoga. So not continually trying to appeal to people who are 22 and young and healthy and fit, but just people who are in need of yoga. And yoga has a lot of very simple tools that can make the difference between somebody having a happy or an unhappy life. So that's what we're trying to do.
And also really exciting is that it sounds like also you may be reaching people maybe not so much in the metropolitan area, like, people more regional and areas that may not have that many yoga studios. But if yoga is a form of therapy and can help them, it would be great for them to somehow access, whether it's online or going to a certain studio in bigger city, but get them to even be aware of yoga can help them with different things. So that would be very, again, you are scaling it again, right?
Scale. Yeah, it needs to be scaled. And you'd be surprised, we went on this big trip to Darwin to talk to yoga teachers in regional areas. We're creating a podcast at the moment with a wonderful woman called Yolande Hyde, who runs something called Yoga for Your Ears. Yeah, it's
That's
lovely.
Great.
Yeah, it's a great name. And we're writing this, we're together making this regional and remote yoga teachers podcast, which we hope will go out on national radio, fingers crossed for us. But it's basically trying to make the point that yoga teachers are not just there to teach asana, It's not stretch. It's about supporting these communities. They're in drought, in poverty, maybe they're in flooding, maybe they're just terribly remote and the isolation, whatever, but yoga teachers, they're in every little town. Really, they might not be online, but when you get out there and you ask at the health food shop or at the post office or whatever, oh yeah, no, Mary Louise is down on the corner doing the da-da-da. So it's got quite a number of yoga teachers out there already doing it, but there's also an incredible range of online options for people doing yoga as well. You're right. Yeah.
I love the awareness when you say about a podcast, Yoga for Years, because people may widen the perception about what yoga is and how they can get benefits. So I think that's very exciting. So rounding up to sort of end of the podcast interview, I want to ask you, with all this tremendous effort and campaign, clearly it sounds like it's a lot. What keeps you motivated or keeps you drive or inspired? Because there are days you're like, oh, do I have to really do this and that, and it's not moving, or so what keeps you going?
I don't have those days, I must say. Those days don't.
Wow.
But I do have the kind of days like, good Lord, how much longer do I have to do without money in my life? Because when you're pushing that edge all the time, it's not like go open a laundromat and follow the recipe to make the laundromat work, right? It's just like, it's very, very hard to keep the money rolling in the door to keep all this going. It's a big investment. So those days I have where I get like, can't something fantastic
because you keep on expanding and stretching and scaling and pushing upward. That's clear to audience. So
does that not sound like an asana? That sounds like a yoga pose, right? So it's yoga, I just keep going back to my practice and back to the breathing and back to all of that. And I don't mean to sound corny about that, but it really does allow anybody who's tackling anything to find a center of peace, a center of coming in and knowing that there's a much bigger picture at stake than how much money is sitting in my bank account in my case, or how tired I might be, or whether I don't want to drive the extra 5,000 K.
5,000.
or whatever it was. No, like going to Darwin and back in 3 weeks.
Mm.
There was 4 yoga teachers with us. So, but like all that stuff that comes up, the resistance. I refer everybody to Patanjali's 9 obstacles of yoga. So it's a really interesting part in the Yoga Sutras, the fundamental philosophy of looking at what an obstacle is in our lives and what that brings about. I'm grateful. I'm really, really grateful for this continual challenge, because what is life other than having more of yourself, like exploring other places, other ideas, other people, other everything, and getting more of the sense that we are all one and we're all connected. And so, like I just feel like I'm very lucky. I've had 2 children. I've done the marriage thing, etc., etc. I'm in a position where I've got more time, and I love to spend it this way.
And it's also amazing where like everyone else, that everybody have different challenges, but they're just different type of challenges. And because of yoga, all this experience you had, that tool that bring you back to that place with breathing or just a better mindset. It's just, again, helping you to get back to the normal way of dealing with it. And because there are days that we probably like really forget about the breathing and just hyperventilating or whatever, but then it brings back, because these are the things that you practice. You're walking your talk for 30 years, so that kind of bring you back with your most resilient self, so you can continue and be grateful for what you have achieved and what is ahead of you. So that sounds like amazing of a yogi journey.
It's all yogi journeys are amazing. And I'm really grateful that you let me share mine.
Well, thank you so much. I think it has been a very interesting, and wow, oh my gosh, there's so many opportunities for people to go and dig deeper. And if they want to be a yoga teacher, or if they either already a yoga teacher, they want more support or do more than teaching a class and do more for the social good, or they want to just try out yoga, there are many options and things that were mentioned, and in which I'm going to put the links below on my blog so that people can click on it. But it's just a lot going on, and there's a lot of offering. It's not just stretching.
Not just stretching. And anybody, if you put my phone number there, I'm so happy to talk to anybody about yoga. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for today.
And appreciation for what you do. Thank you so much for asking me. Really, really lovely.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.